What is tax? The squirrel works on a hazelnut farm. The squirrel is paid with leaves in return for the work it does. At the end of the week, the squirrel earns 100 leaves. The squirrel is happy. Not much, but an honest job. But actually, the squirrel only receives 80 of these 100 leaves because the squirrel government takes 20 leaves. This is tax. Basically, these are the leaves the squirrel must pay to the squirrel government. Every squirrel pays tax in some way, even if they don't want to. What do you mean you're taking some of my leaves? This isn't fair. Ramen didn't die for this. So why do we pay taxes? The squirrel government needs leaves to manage the forest. They use the leaves collected from taxes to fund goods and services for all squirrels. These include things like housing, hospitals, schools, police, fire departments, the army, art galleries, space programs, scientific research, public television, libraries, garbage collection, public transportation, and even retirement. And the squirrel government can collect taxes in different ways because there are many types of taxes. Income tax. The squirrel government takes leaves directly from the squirrel's salary. Sales tax. When the squirrel buys hazelnuts, it pays extra leaves. Property tax. If the squirrel buys a treehouse, it must pay the squirrel government. Capital gains tax. If the squirrel sells a treehouse for more leaves than it bought it for, it must pay the squirrel government. Corporate tax. Large squirrel companies also give a percentage of the leaves they earn. Inheritance tax. The squirrel pays tax on the leaves it inherits. Hooray! Environmental tax. Squirrel companies pay higher tax on products that harm the environment. Luxury tax. A tax on expensive items for squirrels who can buy more than they need. Customs tax. A tax applied to imported products coming from other squirrel countries. Tax brackets. So how much tax should a squirrel pay? This depends on how many leaves the squirrel earns. The more the squirrel earns, the more tax it usually pays. These are called tax brackets, and they look like this. But squirrels make a very common mistake when looking at tax brackets. If a squirrel earns 100,000 leaves, does it pay 22% tax, meaning 22,000 leaves? Wrong. First 10,000 leaves, 0% tax. Next 40,000 leaves, 12% tax, 4,800 leaves. Last 50,000 leaves, 22% tax, 11,000 leaves. So the squirrel's total tax is 15,800 leaves, not 22,000. The squirrel pays 22% only for the part in the high bracket, not for all income. How is tax collected? If the squirrel is an employee, the squirrel government automatically deducts leaves from its salary. But if the squirrel owns a business or is self-employed, it must report how many leaves it earned during the year. This information is prepared and sent in a tax return. How is a tax return done? This changes depending on where the squirrel lives, but the basic process is the same. 1. The squirrel counts the leaves it earned throughout the year. The employer already calculates this and sends it to the squirrel. 2. The squirrel learns how much tax it has already paid during the year. The employer tracks this too. 3. Finally, the most important step, deductible expenses. These are the costs the squirrel must pay for its job. No, those are not business expenses. You can't claim that. Give it to me. I said give it. Deductions include uniforms, tools, training courses, transportation and accommodation for work travel, donations. The squirrel sends this information to the government. They look at how many leaves the squirrel earned, how much tax it owes, and what expenses it had for work. After all calculations, the result comes. If the squirrel paid too little, it must pay the remaining amount. If the squirrel paid too much, the government refunds the squirrel. Tax audit. If the squirrel makes suspicious deductions or has extra income it didn't report, an audit happens. A tax audit is when the government checks the squirrel's information twice, usually done when something doesn't add up. Okay, everything looks normal here. Wait a second. What's this? Why is this written so small? I can barely read it. But doing taxes is not easy, and sometimes the squirrel makes errors. I think it's right. I forgot to carry the warranty. Please don't send me to jail. This is madness. What happens if you don't pay taxes? Nothing. Nothing happens. Of course, that's a joke. First, a warning. Then interest is added, meaning the squirrel now owes even more leaves. Then the government tries to forcefully take the squirrel's leaves. And finally, if the squirrel still doesn't pay, the government takes the squirrel to jail. Names of tax offices. In some countries, USA, IRS, Internal Revenue, Silverback Gorilla. Australia, ATO, Australian Taxation. Orangutan, United Kingdom, HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue Capuchin. Who doesn't pay taxes? Some squirrels do not pay taxes. Unemployed squirrels. Working squirrels who do not earn enough. Baby squirrels. Squirrel charities. Squirrel religious groups. But most squirrels pay some type of tax at some point. How do rich squirrels avoid high taxes? They can do this in many ways. They buy shares, property, or collectible items. When they sell these, the income counts as capital gains, which is taxed lower than regular income. In fact, capital gains tax is about half the tax a squirrel with a regular job pays. If a squirrel owns shares in a company and receives dividends, these are also taxed lower than normal income. Rich squirrels also get tax deductions, negative gearing, from investments. A squirrel buys a tree house and rents it to other squirrels. But if the expenses are more than the income, the squirrel loses leaves. This loss can be deducted from taxes. The squirrel hopes the treehouse will increase in value in the future. Meanwhile, its tax is lower because it has written a loss. Taxes in different countries. Squirrel companies can set up businesses in countries with low taxes, some of the highest tax rates in the world. Finland, 57%. Japan, 55%. Australia, 45%. Wait a second, I can do an Australian accent. Oh yeah, throw another shrimp on the Barbie. Damn it, a dingo stole my baby. Some of the lowest tax rates in the world. Cayman Islands, 0%. Dubai, 0%. Antarctica, 0%, because there are no squirrels there. History of taxes. From the very beginning of the beginning, taxes have been controversial. In the early 1900s, hazelnut tax was a very real issue in the USA. Importers argued that hazelnuts should be taxed low because they were a necessity, not a luxury. I don't want hazelnuts. Oh, really? I need hazelnuts. You're going to jail. In some periods of history, hazelnuts were not taxed and were even given as bribes to officials to receive special tax privileges. Making taxes less scary. This is not financial advice. Please do not sue the squirrel. If a squirrel wants to make taxes easier and avoid accidentally going to jail, it should budget. It should track deductible expenses. But if the squirrel only wants to eat hazelnuts, it can hire a squirrel tax accountant. These squirrels help with tax returns. Sometimes even their fees can be deductible. Two things in life are guaranteed: death, taxes, and hazelnuts. I hope the squirrels now understand taxes. If the squirrel wants to learn more about money, it can watch other videos. And remember, squirrels are stronger together.